next guest has spent the better part of his career fighting for voters' rights to get an electoral machine that better measures the actual electorate. Recently, he has focused those efforts specifically on gerrymandering, which in the simplest of terms is the act of redrawing electoral districts for the singular reason to benefit the incumbent or a given political party in the election. It's one of the things that in our book, Greedy Bastards, we say must change if we are to fix our broken electoral system and better measure the actual intentions of the American people. And it's a hot issue right here in Florida. In fact, in 2010, Floridians, God bless them, voted for the Fair Districts Amendments, which outlaw incumbents from drawing districts to favor themselves or their party. This is one of those ones it's hard to imagine why we have the rule. It's crazy that we have to fix this, but we do. Now, as states all over the country are redistricting with results from the latest census, some of Florida's incumbents are suing the state to get around those Fair Districts Amendments. And joining us now is Dan Gelber, who is a former state senator and general counsel for FairDistrictsNow.org. You say that this passed with 63% in the support in the state. Tea Party, Democrat, Republican, you pick it. Why?
Well, because I think voters felt like people who were electing them were just filled with the hubris and the arrogance because they get to pick their voters rather than their voters picking them. And Florida had one of the worst gerrymandered states anywhere. In the 6 years prior to this passing, there were 430 state, House, and Senate elections. Only 3 incumbents lost out of 430 elections. Think about that. Nobody worries about the voters anymore. And the voters said, well, it's time we made you worry a little bit about us. And that's why I think these passed.
Educate us a little bit on what exactly it was that passed. How does the fix work and how good is it at this point?
It's very simple. All the Fair Districts Amendments say is that if you are in the legislature, when it redistricts, when it draws the lines after the census, it cannot draw to help an incumbent or to advance the partisan interests of a party. You've got to worry about compactness and all the other geographical and political boundaries, but you can't do it for yourself or your party. Sort of something that, as you said, should happen anyway, but it didn't until the League of Women Voters and a bunch of other very good organizations said, we're going to stop this, and Floridians overwhelmingly said, we're with you. And in a tough election year, 63% is something that was sort of amazing.
And who checks that? So in principle, what you're saying makes a tremendous amount of sense, but who's in charge of checking to make sure that that's not happening?
Well, this is now in our Constitution. So the Florida Supreme Court will have an opportunity to determine whether the legislature, which is drawing those districts literally as we speak, complied with the criteria. If they determine that they did it to favor an incumbent, if they did it to favor a political party, then they're going to either send it back or draw them themselves. So it gives the courts the ability to check what the legislature does to make sure they're not doing their districts in a way that favors themselves.
We've seen California go with some gerrymandering reform where we've watching Bill Samuels up in New York work aggressively to try to work against the gerrymandering in New York State. How can all Florida, Texas, New York, California, and every other state in the country really start to raise the temperature from the ground up to get more of this?
Well, listen, until you let your elected leaders know that there are repercussions for what they do, and if you never
hold on, though, how can I let my elected leaders know that there's repercussions for what they do when they've gerrymandered the districts such that I can't vote them out?
You've got to create a criteria exactly and precisely the way they did in Florida. Florida Constitution now says to the legislature, you better not draw those districts for yourselves. You can't draw them for a political party. And the courts can now have the authority to check on that and, if necessary, draw the maps themselves. And that's our current legislature, the House, is suing in federal court to try to stop these things from being implemented. They've lost in every court, and I think they're going to lose all the way through. But the truth of the matter is, until you give the courts the authority or create a different process, the legislature will always act in its best interests, in its partisan interests, or to protect themselves, Democrat or Republican.
How dangerous is it for any democracy to allow the voice of the voter to become an illusion? So I talk a lot about the pro wrestling nature of our political process right now. Sort of it appears to be this battle for power, but in reality, there's 6 industries funding both political parties. There's gerrymandered districts. Just how toxic is it?
Well, the moment you draw districts that are more competitive, you put into incumbents the idea that they no longer can do whatever they want. Hubris dissipates and is minimized, which is the greatest problem legislators and elected officials have, where they think there are no repercussions for a bad vote or taking care of some industry rather than a voter. And when all of a sudden they realize that they're no longer going to pick their voters, they act differently, and they will act differently. And that's why the Fair Districts amendments are so great. By creating fair, competitive districts, elected officials have to worry because they're not sure if the people that they're representing are going to just go along with anything they do.
In effect, if you are forced to listen, you'll listen.
Right, right. And in fact, if you don't know who your voters are going to be, you worry about whether or not you're acting on behalf of actual constituents or some huge interest that paid you a lot of money to think about them rather than the people you represent.
It would also strike me as I think about it, to the extent to which you have gerrymandered districts and guaranteed voters, it's much easier to oblige your campaign donors without repercussions.
Right.
When you do not have gerrymandered districts, it is a much riskier proposition to pander to out-of-state moneyed interests. Is that fair?
Not only is it in-state money interest. The moment you realize that the voters who are going to be deciding whether you're sitting in that chair next year are people that you didn't pick, but that picked you and will pick you again, and you'll have to stand before them, it changes your whole attitude. Competitive elections are terrific for a democracy. When elected officials get to pick who they want voting for them, they become entrenched, they become arrogant, they stop listening to people because they don't fear the voters' wrath. And what is more important in a democracy than voters deciding who they want to represent them?
It is absurd that we have to have this conversation.
Well,
I congratulate you on your work and the efforts that you're making, and I hope that you're inspiring millions of others in this country to follow suit.
Well, it was a confederation of terrific groups like the League of Women Voters, like Common Cause, like the NAACP, many others. So,
even the Tea Party, you said, was hugely behind this.
Listen, I think 63% in Florida. The governor got less than 48%, I think. So this was wildly popular among every nonpartisan group or partisan group.
All right, well, nice to see you. Make a note, justice sells, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. A final